Locked On Jayhawks, Bill Self doubles down. Zeke Mayo, the best player on the team? Question mark.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making LOJ your first listen every day. Thank you for the everydayers tuning in to each and every show, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We have the actual right graphic template today on YouTube, so apologies for that on the last show, but we're going to be talking a little KU basketball today. Bill Self reiterating some interesting stuff on Zeke Mayo and some other interesting pieces about this year's team as we're less than 3 weeks away from Late Night in the Fog. I think 2 weeks from this upcoming Friday for Late Night for KU. We're also going to get into a little KU football here because I want to go over some Pro Football Focus rankings about where KU ranks positionally in the conference and maybe what that can tell us or teach us for the rest of the season or for where things have kind of gone south for KU to this point in time. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And you can make every moment more with FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. I haven't been able to find Zeke Mayo futures on National Player of the Year, but maybe if you could find it, I don't know. I mean, if you can't find it, that probably means probably getting 250 to 1 odds, something like that. You know, maybe a little sprinkling in there. But we talked about the podcast that Bill Self went on with Seth Davis, and he mentioned Zeke Mayo as being the best player that they've had so far. And it wasn't totally clear the context of it, of if he was talking about, because the question that was asked was about newcomers. Was he talking about he's been the best player among the newcomers or he's been the best player overall? And even if it is just the newcomers, it would be a significant comment to make. Also, could it have been, some way of trying to boost his confidence or trying to force somebody else who's gone in competition with him to really refocus and bear down and compete even harder, whatever it is. Like, those things are all possible from a coach. But now that it has happened again, which Bill Self went on the Jeff Goodman podcast. He does a podcast with Robbie Hummel, former Purdue player, and he reiterated that Zeke Mayo has been their best player. And so now that you have it twice, now that you have this reiteration of it, I think it almost cements the idea that this is real, that Zeke Mayo is translating, that, with Zeke Mayo, I think you expect him to be a starter, so much so that Bill Self even said, quote, be hard to keep Juan, KJ, although he might have said AJ. I'm not totally sure if he said KJ or AJ. I think he said KJ, though. But be hard to keep Juan, KJ, Hunt, and Zeke Mayo out of the lineup. That was talking about predicting the starting 5. And then you'd be left with the 5th starter, which, again, if he said KJ, I think you'd assume it'd be AJ, but who knows? Maybe it could be Rylan Griffin. Maybe it could be somebody else. If he did say AJ, then that opens up an interesting possibility of, do you play an extra guard? But I don't think that's what he said. But he said Zeke's been our most consistent, best guy since June. So maybe that first portion when he first joined the team, maybe there were a few weeks where it was getting accustomed to Big 12 play, to Kansas, to everything. Since then, he has been the guy. And Bill Self also mentioned it'd be nice to stretch the defense around Hunt. Zeke provides that as much as anybody, right? They have a bunch of good three-point shooters on the team, and we already knew that Zeke Mayo was going to be an elite three-point shooter. The question was going to be, did he translate over in terms of the other stuff too, right? I mean, he's been a good rebounder. If he's your secondary passer, ball handler next to Dajuan, you're totally cool with that, because guess what? He was successful at that as a freshman, playing next to Baylor Shireman at South Dakota State. And beyond that, it gives you another passer and ball handler on the floor. But if this continues to be a thing that he's talking about, he's been their best player to this point, what does that look like? Because to me, there's a very, I don't know, the size is a little bit different. Like, Zeke is an inch or two taller than this guy I'm about to bring up, but this other guy I'm about to bring up has, I think, more quickness to him, a lot more quickness to him, probably more speed to him. But in terms of just being a combo point guard, shooting guard type, you can slide into either role, who can get your own shot off the bounce, shoot really deep from three-point range, hit threes at a high volume, shake and bake guys. Sounds a little bit like Devontae Graham. And that's the ultimate outcome for Zeke Mayo here. But again, the point is, if he is being their best player, which Bill Self has now reiterated twice, that's kind of the prototype of what you're looking at. And if you're looking at adding a Devontae Graham type to a team that has an All-American big man, to a team that has a pass-first point guard who's good at the other stuff but isn't the best scorer in the world, to a team that has all these other pieces, isn't that kind of just the perfect fit? So maybe the closer we get, it's not just that we're predicting Zeke Mayo to be in the starting lineup, as Bill Self even said there to kind of, confirm that, but maybe we're getting closer to like if I'm picking who's going to lead Kansas in scoring, it's Hunter Dickinson. But if we're having the conversation, who's going to lead Kansas in scoring besides Hunter Dickinson, who's going to lead Kansas scoring among the perimeter players, I've always just kind of penciled in AJ Storr to that conversation. Maybe it is Zeke Mayo. Now, there were very interesting comments about AJ Storr. Again, if you go back to the comment about the starters, it's possible he said AJ instead of KJ. I thought he said KJ, though, but he said in talking about AJ Storr, I think there's a reason he didn't list the fifth starter. I think it probably will be AJ Storr. This feels like to me playing the mental warfare game if you're Bill Self, right? Not trying to guarantee that AJ Storr's coming in. He's a really good player. But Bill Self wants to take him from being a good player to being a great player. And he sees that potential in him. And he sees a guy who can already be a good player scoring the ball, but can he be a good player in these other areas? And that's what I think Bill Self is trying to do by not, giving him that, hey, you'd be in the starting lineup right now. Because he also mentioned as part of this podcast that he thinks AJ Storr should be the best offensive rebounder in the country, right? Because he thinks that he's a good wing that's super athletic, that's strong. He should be a great offensive rebounder. And he said, I don't know that he's thinking that yet. He also said he should be a tremendous defender. Again, if you have the idea of this AJ Storr who's, 6'5", 6'6", whatever he is, who's a power wing, he's got good speed, he's got super powerful athleticism, he can jump up. Why shouldn't you be a good defender who can defend threes and fours and really make an impact? And he kind of talked about that, he should be somebody who, hey, if you're NBA scouts, like you already know you can score the basketball, but what's going to, light somebody's eyes up is, oh, you missed a shot. Now you're pressing the guy for 90 feet down the court because you have the ability to do that. And so I found that very interesting with AJ Storr in the standpoint of you can tell Bill Self is playing that game with him as all great coaches do, because he sees it that AJ Storr is comfortable being good, but he's trying to take AJ Storr to that next level. So at the end of the day, I expect AJ Storr to start, but I think he's definitely trying to, and I think it makes sense for KU. We talked about this, like for KU to be a better team, it's not just about the scoring and the 3-point shooting, but it is about the defense. And if AJ Storr is not a good defender, that's going to certainly hurt a lineup that we saw struggle defending pick and rolls with Hunter Dickinson at the 5. And if Zeke Mayo isn't the most athletic player in the world, I don't know that he's going to be a great defender. So if AJ Storr is not a good defender, it makes things a little bit more difficult on that end. And rebounding the basketball, right? If KJ is not improved as a rebounder, then you're really putting pressure on the guy who's playing the 3, which would be AJ Storr, to be a good rebounder in the same vein that Kevin McCullough was, right? To kind of make up for some of that a little bit, because Hunter Dickinson's going to be a good defensive rebounder machine for your team overall. But who else can be that good offensive rebounder, which Bill Self kind of talked about. So those are some other interesting comments. He also reiterated wanting the 8 starters. That's kind of been a constant theme all offseason, that if something happens to somebody, that they still have a player they can bring in that they're good enough to start at Kansas. He added to that it's going to be more productive for Dajuan Harris, for KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, if they're not playing 36 to 37 minutes a night. He said, let's get their numbers down a little bit. And that's what we did when we last projected the lineup. So I think that kind of makes sense more and more as we did that. And then the last interesting comment that I wanted to at least touch on real quick, he mentioned Marquise Passmore as an Ochai Agbaji type, but he said he won't quite be there as a freshman. He said it's going to take some time. So our last projection, we didn't necessarily have him getting minutes. We gave minutes to spot minutes. I think if you're looking at the spot minutes that are going to be available for KU per game, that 8 of the spot minutes could go to this guy one night, 4 of the spot minutes could go to this guy, or all whatever allocation of spot minutes could go to this guy each and every night, whatever it is. I think if you're looking at the pecking order of who could get those spot minutes, you probably would slide Rickey's Passmore down maybe below like David Coit and Zach Clements in terms of what's the hierarchy, what's the pecking order here out of all this. But it doesn't change at all that I think Rickey's Passmore is going to be a tremendous player should he stick around at Kansas. All right, let's get on to where KU ranks positionally in the Big 12 in football and offense and defense according to Pro Football Focus and what it can kind of tell us, because I think there's some interesting rankings here for KU football. This episode of the show is brought to you by Roy, and it's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. Roy's a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5K cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. This week, we've selected Bryce Cabledew. Last week we picked Devin Neal for this, very deserved, not just for season, game, all that stuff, career. With Bryce Cabledew, he had an excellent game. He graded over a 90 overall on Pro Football Focus last week, helping protect Jalon Daniels. And for Cabledew, he had an awesome game in protection overall. But it's not just about that. Sometimes all the skill players get all the shine. Let's give a little love to the offensive lineman up front. So if you were impressed as I was with his performance on Saturday or somebody else's, you can show him love too. Just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in just $10, that adds up pretty fast for Bryce Cabledew or whoever else. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for, again, Bryce Cabledew or any other players you want to talk about and their standout performance, as well as we'll continue to bring to the program. Get off the sidelines and get into the NIL game with Roy. Thanks to the everydayers tuning in each and every episode. Thank you to you for listening. If this is your first time, please subscribe if you could. Okay, so we're going to get into a little KU football talk here. Where KU football ranks different positions compared to their Big 12 counterparts. Because it's one thing when you hear me going over the Pro Football Focus scores or talking about, hey, this player is this grade. How does that compare to the rest of the conference to give you an idea about what's happening for KU? Well, let's start with quarterback. Jalon Daniels, it does not rank very well, as you'd imagine, 14th in the conference in total QBR. So again, not great, but you could have obviously told that with your own eyes. Running back, Devin Neal ranks 4th. Daniel Highshaw ranks 8th. That is among 24. So that's basically saying KU has 2 upper half starters in the Big 12. I also think Devin Neal, even at being ranked 4th, probably underrated. And I think a big reason why he is so good at vision and cutting and knowing when to cut and where to cut. It's one thing for, if you're grading somebody, like if you're Pro Football Focus, to be like, oh, this guy tangibly, he stiff-armed this guy, he spun by this guy, he broke a bunch of tackles. It's a lot harder for them to give you a positive grade if you just had really good vision and you never had to get touched to begin with, right? But anyway, the top for the receivers, Luke Grimm ranks 5th in the conference, so he's having a really good year by that. I found this interesting. LJ Arnold's 28th, so about middle of the pack, because there's 56 who are eligible by the snap counts here. Quentin Skinner's down to 53rd. Now, how much of these receivers is being hurt by, hey, if you're not getting as many opportunities from the quarterback, it's going to go down. But there's been some key drops in there from both those guys in Skinner and Arnold, including this past week. And so as much as Jalon has struggled, as much as Jeff Grimes has struggled, I do think the receiving core hasn't been as good as it was maybe a year ago or 2 seasons ago as the overall, as the whole. But how much of that, as we kind of talked about recently, is you lose your confidence, you lose your rhythm when the quarterback is struggling, and then it's hard for you to get it back. I don't know. But overall, in the country, KU receiving grade ranks 57th. That is 10th in the Big 12, and it is a far cry from where they ranked overall the last 2 years. As far as tight end, Jared Casey ranks 8th among 38 qualified in the Big 12. Trevor Cardell is 17th. So, neither one of those is outstanding, but you figure 16 teams in the Big 12, Casey's 8th. Puts you in the middle of the pack, and then you have 17th. So that basically means your second string tight end, if you viewed it as, 1 through 16 was all starters for the Big 12 teams, that would basically mean you have the best backup. So theoretically, that actually looks okay. The unit might be better than you might expect based on the production or the lack of production we've seen in the passing game, which tells me Pro Football Focus actually grades it okay. Probably is more about the offensive coordinator, the quarterback, not getting them involved than it is on them necessarily. What about the center position? Okay, this is what I found interesting. I actually tweeted this out the other day, but the KU offensive line, astoundingly great grades on Pro Football Focus right now. Bryce Foster's the number 1 center in the Big 12. Michael Ford is the number 1 guard in the Big 12. And then you have Kobe Baines, who is sixth for guards. He's ranked among 37 qualified. So if both your guards are top six, that's great. Your tackle, Logan Brown, is third. Bryce Campbell, after that awesome performance last week, is ranked fifth. All of your offensive linemen are ranked in the top six of their position. And when you're looking at the guard and tackle spots, think about it. That's 2 guards and 2 tackles for each team. So it's not just 16 starters. It's 32 starters across the Big 12 plus any backups that are rotating in. That's remarkable. And overall right now, Kansas is 6th in Big 12 pass blocking, 1st in run blocking. This offensive line has been great. I don't know if it's been quite as good as it was a season ago because he had Dom Pooney, but it's been pretty darn good. And so I think when you look at it and go, okay, then what's the issue here? If the offensive line is blocking really well, the running backs are playing well, the receivers haven't been as good, but Luke Grimm still grades out well. The tight ends actually grade out okay. Again, this all circles back to the passing game, the quarterback, the offensive coordinator, whatever is causing that issue, whether it's a combination of both or more blame to one guy, it's killing everything. Because even from the blocking perspective, right, if the other team loads the box, all 5 KU offensive linemen could get a positive grade on a running play, and it could only get like 5 yards because they block the guy they're supposed to, but there's too many guys in the box that they can't block 2 guys each. And then you end up with a 5-yard gain on a play where if you were passing the ball well, maybe there's 6 or 7 guys in the box, and then maybe that's a 10-yard pickup. Maybe that's a 15-yard pickup. Maybe that's a 60-yard touchdown. I don't know. Let's get to the defense side of the ball, though, too, before we get to more overarching takeaways. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. You can get early futures for KU basketball, for National Player of the Year. If you think KU is going to pull the upset this week at Arizona State, you can bet on that. Player props for the game. Chiefs on Monday Night Football against the Saints. Playoff baseball. Bobby Witt to hit a home run. Or, Seth Lugo to have over strikeouts. Make a parlay. Make a combination. Have fun with it at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, we just got to the offensive side of the ball where they rank compared to the Big 12. What about the defensive side of the ball? So, and as far as the interior defensive linemen, how about this one? Blake Harrell ranks 6th in the Big 12 right now. Tommy Dunn ranks 10th. Keenan Caldwell ranks 18th. Now, DJ Withers ranks 21st. Caleb Taylor ranks 27th. So that is among 57 qualified on the interior D-line. So a couple takeaways there. One, the fact that Harrell, Dunn, and Caldwell are your 3 highest graded, and those are your 3 lowest in snaps on the interior of the D-line. Does that mean that they're putting the wrong guys in more often than the rest, or does it mean it's easier to be efficient if you're playing less snaps? I probably lean toward that because the grades aren't all that different. Like, think about it this way. You see players all the time, like college basketball, for instance. A guy might average 10, 12 points per game. They're not being asked to do as much, right? They might be the 4th scorer on the team, the 3rd scorer on the team. And they might be shooting 40% from 3, 50% from the floor. Then the next year, the top 2 guys in front of them graduate. What typically happens? That guy sees his points per game go up. Maybe he gets up to 18 points per game. But you see the efficiency drop. Maybe it goes down to 36% from 3. Maybe it goes down to 45% from the field because you're having to take tougher shots. You're having to take a bigger load, more volume. Teams are keying on you more. That's kind of probably how this is going. It's easier if you're a defensive tackle to give 100% effort each and every play if you're playing 15 snaps, 20 snaps, than it probably is if you're playing 30 or 40. But I do find that interesting. But nonetheless, the overall takeaway is that 57 qualified. That means all 5 of KU's D tackles in the rotation are in the top half of the qualified defensive tackles in the Big 12. That's actually really impressive. So that unit has actually been very good for KU. Now, as far as the edge, doesn't grade nearly as well. Jeremy Robinson's 23rd. Dylan Woodkey is 33rd. Dean Miller's 37th, and DJ Warner is 50th. That is a 57 qualified. One thing I find interesting here, though, is between Warner and Miller. So Miller's PFF grades in the 4 FBS games is a 60.1. It drops down a little bit because his best game was against Lindenwood. For Warner in those 4 FBS games, it's 56.2. So you're getting a little bit closer between the two of them. But over the last 2 weeks, Dean Miller has a 56.2 PFF grade. If you just averaged out the previous 2, DJ Warner has a 58.9. I don't think it's going to be long before we start seeing DJ Warner playing more than Dean Miller at some point in time, the way this is kind of going. But yeah, that unit, you're not getting as much as you might have hoped. Linebacker, JB Brown's ranked 4th in the Big 12. Cornell Wheeler is 6th. And then this is the bad one. Taiwan Berryhill is ranked 50th of 50 linebackers in the Big 12. Yeah, just sigh. And you hope Cornell Wheeler gets healthy soon. Corner, Kobe Bryant's ranked 8th. Melo Dotson's ranked 20th. Those are both still solid. There's a lot of corners that are eligible for this, but still kind of underperforming given the true talent there. Is it a few bad games? Is it poor scheme? This is something we recently talked about. Like, is KU playing a scheme that benefits more average corners that helps protect them? Whereas when you have really good corners, you should play a more aggressive scheme on the outside. That's my opinion. But yeah, you probably could get a little bit more production there, but still, that's not like a disaster or bad or anything. As far as safety, this leaves something very much to be desired. Marvin Grant ranks well. He's above it at 70 overall. There's a lot of highly graded safeties in the Big 12. So that actually puts him 15th. But then you have Devin Dye, who's 41st, OJ Burrows, who's 46th, and Jalon Dye, who's 52nd. That is among 52 qualified. So it's been a rough year for the safeties, save Marvin Grant. You could probably argue, if you're looking at the worst position group of the team, it's probably between quarterback and safety right now. I guess you could throw D-end, but I think there's at least a little bit more quality there. So maybe you wouldn't pick safety just because Marvin Grant's at least been good. But I don't know. This exercise, we went through it. Like, there were a lot of good grades for KU players. There were a lot of good ranks for KU players. And honestly, it just kind of leaves me more perplexed. It leaves me more optimistic in other ways that, like, hey, you still have a good team. Like, the record, the wins will come eventually if you keep doing the right things. I don't know. But also even more frustrated because they shouldn't be a 1-4 team. And kind of further clearing up the same thing that we've been talking about, that, like, they are a passing game. They are, good offensive play, good play calling away from having a much better record. If Kansas could just pass the ball consistently and be efficiently they'd be a really good team. But instead, it's kind of a giant mess. So you can have your own takeaways from that, and glass half full, glass half empty. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on tomorrow's show. Talk a little more KU football, a little mailbag, and Jalon Daniels or Jeff Grimes. Which of the two should be changed out first? We'll discuss that on tomorrow's episode. This has been LOJ.